My name is Sybil. I'm 28 years old. They called my dreams a joke. They told me I'd never amount to anything. For years, I was the family's resident failure, the cautionary tale they'd whisper about at holiday dinners. I was left to build my success completely on my own, in the silence of their doubt and the echo of their laughter. So when my phone rang late one night, with my family on the other end asking for a handout, I knew exactly what I was going to say. Their disbelief had been the fuel I had learned to burn for warmth. And now, standing in the bright light of everything I had built, they came knocking, shivering in the cold and asking for a piece of my fire. They were about to learn that the boy they'd cast out had not only survived, he'd mastered the wilderness. And in my world, there are no free rides. There's a special kind of quiet in a house where you're supposed to be family, but you always feel like a guest. It's the quiet of bitten tongues, of your wins going unnoticed, of your biggest dreams being met with a dismissive wave. For the first 22 years of my life, that quiet was the soundtrack to my existence. My family didn't just disbelieve in me, they weren't even interested in who I was trying to become. Their vision for my life was a reflection of their own fears, a safe, predictable path I had no intention of walking. They had a script written for me, and when I refused to follow it, they didn't just disapprove, they practically wrote me out of the show. The irony? Now they're desperate to be written back in. But the ink is dry, the book is closed, and the author, that's me, has moved on. This is the story of how I built an empire on the foundation of their rejection, and why, when they came asking for a key to the castle, I left them standing at the gates. Growing up, my world was defined by one single comparison. My older brother, Mark. Mark was the golden child, the poster boy for all of my parents' hopes. He followed the family blueprint perfectly. Good grades in practical subjects, a finance degree from a state school, and a job lined up at a downtown firm before he even tossed his graduation cap. His life was a straight line, a story my parents could proudly tell their friends. He was their success. I, on the other hand, was their problem. Not because I got into trouble or failed my classes, but because my passions were inconvenient. They didn't fit into the neat little boxes my parents had built. While Mark was memorizing stock trends, I was learning to code. While he was networking at job fairs, I was in the garage, soldering circuit boards and tinkering with prototypes for smart home devices, long before that was even a thing. My dreams were met with this soul-crushing mix of ridicule and condescension. I'll never forget this one dinner when I was 19. I was buzzing with excitement because I'd just finalized the design for my first major project, a hub that could control a home's lights, temperature, and security from one simple interface. It was clunky, sure, built from salvaged parts in a cheap plastic case, but it worked. I tried to explain it to my dad, my voice full of that pure, unfiltered passion of a creator. Imagine, I said, you could turn off every light in the house from your bed, or check if the doors are locked without getting up. You could even have the coffee maker start brewing the second your alarm goes off. My father, a man who measured life in quarterly earnings and pension plans, just stared at me over his pot roast. He took a slow sip of water and looked at my mother with a weary sigh. So, you've invented a fancy light switch? Mark, ever the pragmatist, chimed in with a smirk. Who would even buy that? Sounds like a solution looking for a problem. People can just flip a switch, you know. It's not that hard. The table laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was worse. It was a patronizing little chuckle, the kind you give a kid who says he wants to be a pirate. It was the laugh of people who couldn't see the world as it could be. In that moment, I felt myself shrink. My grand vision, my sleepless nights, my spark of innovation, all reduced to a fancy light switch. They weren't just dismissing my idea, they were dismissing me. It wasn't just verbal either. A few months after the fancy light switch dinner, I hit a wall. To take my prototype to the next level, I needed a 3D printer. Back then, they were still a niche, expensive technology, but a basic one was about $1,000. To me, a college student working part-time at a bookstore, it was a fortune. I spent weeks putting together a detailed proposal, outlining how it would let me create custom parts, test designs faster, and build something I could actually show investors. I didn't even ask for a gift. I asked for a loan. I went to my dad in his home office, a room that always smelled of leather and accomplishment. He was reviewing spreadsheets, his whole world in neat little cells. I laid out my case, showing him my designs, my budget, and my plan to pay him back with interest once I got seed funding. He pretended to listen, his eyes scanning the papers without really seeing them. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather throne. "Daniel," he began, in that tone he used for explaining obvious truths, "I'm not investing in your hobby. It's a waste of money and a waste of your time. You should be focusing on your studies, on getting an internship at a real company, like Mark did. You have potential, but you're squandering it on these little projects that will never go anywhere." "It's not a hobby," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "It's a business. This is the future." "The future," he repeated, the words dripping with skepticism. "The future is a stable career, a 401k, and a mortgage. Not playing with toys in the garage. The answer is no. And I don't want to hear about it again. Focus on what's real." I walked out of that office feeling hollow. It wasn't just about the money. It was the total lack of faith. He wouldn't even give me a loan, a simple business transaction. My own father had assessed my potential and decided it was worthless. The final straw was the blatant favoritism. It was a constant grind on my self-worth. One Christmas, I came home from college having just won a regional innovation competition. My Smart Hub project had beaten entries from graduate students. The prize was $5,000 and a feature in a local tech journal. It was the first real validation I'd ever received. I was on cloud nine. I got home and the house was already buzzing. Turns out, Mark had a success too. He'd been put in charge of the office's annual charity drive. A temporary administrative role. Objectively, a minor responsibility. But to my parents, you would have thought he'd been named CEO. "We're so proud of him," my mother gushed. "They trust him with so much. His boss said he has real leadership qualities." My father clapped Mark on the back. "That's my boy, climbing the ladder. See, Daniel, that's what happens when you apply yourself in the real world." Later that night, I hesitantly pulled the trophy from my bag. "Hey, I actually have some good news too," I started. "I won the Regional Tech Expo last month." My mother glanced at the trophy. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, before immediately turning back to my aunt. "Anyway, as I was saying, Mark has to coordinate with 3 different charities." My father didn't even look. He was already deep in a conversation with Mark about corporate tax incentives. My moment, my victory, my $5,000, and the proof that I wasn't just playing with toys. It was completely invisible to them. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I felt the full weight of their disbelief. Their narrative was clear. Mark was the success. I was the disappointment. They didn't see my passion or my hard work. They only saw me straying from their path. And in their world, any deviation was failure. It was right then, in that cold, quiet room, that a different feeling started to grow under the pain. A cold, hard resolve. If they wouldn't believe in me, I'd have to believe in myself enough for all of us. If they wouldn't invest in me, I'd be my own investor. And if they wouldn't celebrate my wins, I would build a life so successful, their silence would be deafening. The turning point wasn't some dramatic explosion. It was the quiet, final click of a door closing. It happened a few months after that Christmas, on a phone call with my mother. I was working like a dog trying to get that 3D printer. I took extra shifts, sold old electronics, and ate ramen for dinner most nights. I was a few $100s short and made one last, desperate appeal. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm not asking for a handout. I'm just asking for a little faith. I'm so close." Her reply was the final straw. "Daniel, your father and I love you, but we're worried. This obsession of yours, it's not healthy. Mark is already saving for a down payment on a condo. You're saving for a toy. Maybe it's time to grow up and accept that some things aren't meant to be. A toy. The word just hung there. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. That desperate need for their approval, a hunger that had gnawed at me for years, finally died. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Some things aren't meant to be." I hung up. I wasn't angry. I was free. It was time to succeed on my own terms, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. The next few years were a blur of relentless, solitary work. The grind was my sanctuary. I finally bought that 3D printer, and it ran 24/7 in the corner of my tiny apartment. The air was a permanent mix of melting plastic and stale coffee. My life was a cycle, a part-time job that paid the bills, my online classes, and my project. My days started at 6 a.m. stocking shelves, afternoons were for lectures, and my nights, from 8 p.m. until my eyes blurred, were for Aura, the name I'd given my system. There were times I almost gave up. I remember staring at a mountain of credit card debt, my code refusing to compile, the prototype sitting dead on my workbench. My father's voice echoed in my head, "Focus on what's real." I was alone, exhausted, and chasing a dream no one believed in. The temptation to just quit and get a normal job was huge. But then I'd remember their dismissive laughter, the "that's nice, dear," the cold "no." And that memory was stronger than caffeine. My success became a mission fueled by spite. The first breakthrough came after almost 2 years. I had a polished, working prototype of Aura. It was sleek, responsive, and way ahead of anything on the market. I used what little money I had left to rent a tiny booth at a small tech trade show. I drove there in my beat-up car. The prototype buckled into the passenger seat like it was my kid. For 2 days, I stood for 10 hours straight, giving the same demo over and over. Mostly, people just walked by. But then, a woman stopped. She didn't look like an investor, just jeans and a blazer. She listened to my whole pitch, asked sharp, insightful questions, and then played with the device for 20 minutes. Finally, she handed me her card. Her name was Sarah, a partner at a small venture capital firm. "This is impressive," she said. "It's intuitive. It solves problems people don't even know they have yet. We have a pitch day in 3 weeks. You should be there." That moment was like the first breath of air after being underwater for years. Someone else saw it. 3 weeks later, I was in a polished boardroom, my heart pounding. I was surrounded by slick entrepreneurs with slicker PowerPoints. All I had was my prototype and an honest speech about what I believed in. I walked out of that room with a check for $100,000. I still remember sitting in my car, just holding that check. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet validation. I had an impulse to call my parents to tell them my hobby was now a funded company, but I stopped. What was the point? To hear them say, "Oh, that's nice," now that a stranger with money had validated me? No, this win was mine. I earned it in the silence, and I'd celebrate it the same way. The next 5 years were a whirlwind. The seed money let me quit my jobs, rent a tiny office over a pizza shop, and hire my first employee. We worked tirelessly, and Aura Home Systems was born. Our first product line was small, but it was perfect. We launched with almost no marketing, relying on word of mouth. And then, it happened. A major tech publication got one of our units and wrote a glowing review, calling Aura the apple of the smart home. The effect was instant. Our servers crashed. We sold out in a week. Suddenly, we weren't just a startup. We were a phenomenon. The growth was explosive. That first $100,000 turned into millions. We moved into a real office with glass walls. I was in magazines my father read and on news shows my mother watched. My name, once the family code for disappointment, was now linked with success. Through all this, my family remained a distant echo. I didn't reach out, and they mostly left me alone. No congratulations, no apologies. When my brother Mark got married, I was invited, but they sat me at a table with distant cousins. far from the family. The message was clear. You may be a big shot out there, but in here, you're still the outsider. And I was fine with that. My company was my family now. My team, they were my brothers and sisters. I met a woman, Clara, an architect who understood building something from nothing. We built a life together, a home filled with light and laughter, the opposite of the quiet, judgmental house I grew up in. When Aura was acquired by a tech giant for a staggering amount of money, the news was everywhere. The boy who couldn't get a $1,000 loan was now a multimillionaire. The story of my lonely rise became part of my public image, but no one knew the real details. They just saw the success, not the scars. I thought that was the end of the story. I had my success, my peace. I was wrong. It was only the end of Act 2. The call came on a Tuesday night after 10. An unknown number flashed on my screen. I usually ignore them, but for some reason, I answered. Hello? The voice was hesitant. It took me a second to place it. It was my mother. Daniel, it's Mom. Her tone was all wrong. The usual forced cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a brittle anxiety. Is everything okay? I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. A long pause. Not really, she finally said. Can we talk? Your father and I and Mark, we need to talk to you. My blood ran cold. This was different. This was an emergency. What happened? I asked, my voice flat. It's your brother, she said, her voice breaking. Mark, he made some very bad investments. And your father, he tried to help him. He co-signed loans. Daniel, it's a mess. Mark, the golden child, had gambled and lost, big time. My father, with his retirement savings, had backed the wrong horse. How bad is it? I asked, already guessing the answer. They could lose everything, she whispered. The house. Everything your father worked for. The house. The stage for all my childhood humiliations. I felt a strange, detached pang of something, but it wasn't sympathy. What do you want from me? We need to see you, she pleaded. Can we come over? Tomorrow? The next day, they sat in my living room, looking small and out of place. My father, once a giant in my eyes, was slumped in his chair, his face gray. My mother wrung her hands, her eyes darting around at a life she had no part in. And Mark, the golden child, just stared at the floor, his usual smug confidence replaced by the hollow shame of a man who'd lost it all. They stumbled through the story. Mark's firm was bankrupt. The loans were being called in. The bank was threatening to foreclose on my parents' home. They were ruined. After a long, painful silence, my father looked at me. His eyes, which had always held disappointment, were now filled with desperate hope. Daniel, he said, his voice raspy, we need your help. You've done so well. We're family. My mother chimed in, a sliver of her old entitlement returning. It's your duty, Daniel, to help your family. We raised you. We gave you everything. Everything? The word slipped out, cold and sharp. The room fell silent. I looked at their faces, expectant, desperate, and totally oblivious. They actually believed it. They'd rewritten history in their minds. This was it. The moment I'd been unknowingly preparing for my whole life. I'd imagined it with yelling and tears. But sitting there, I just felt an icy calm. The revenge I was about to take wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be quiet. It was going to be a business transaction. I leaned forward. I see. You're here for a bailout. Let's treat this as what it is. A business proposal. You're seeking an investment to cover liabilities from a series of poorly managed ventures. Correct? My father blinked. Well, I suppose so. We just need... Let's analyze the deal, I cut in. As an investor, I look at past performance. The leadership, Mark, has a proven track record of catastrophic failure. The financial oversight, you, Dad, enabled this failure. From a business perspective, this is the worst investment I've ever seen. Mark flinched. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. But let's talk about personal history, since you brought up family. I, too, once came to you with a business proposal, a small $1,000 seed loan. I had a plan, a prototype, and passion. I paused, letting the memory hang in the air. Your response, Dad, was to call it a foolish waste of time. You taught me a valuable lesson. I couldn't rely on this family for backing, so I learned not to. This life I've built is a testament to that lesson, and I'm grateful for it. I turned to my mother. You mentioned raising me. I remember winning my first big award in college, $5,000. That same week, Mark was put in charge of an office charity drive, and you threw a party for him. My trophy got a, "That's nice, dear." You taught me my successes weren't worth celebrating, so I learned to celebrate them on my own. Finally, I looked at Mark. You laughed at my dream, a fancy light switch, you called it. You taught me my vision was a joke, so I learned to build it far from the sound of your laughter. I leaned back. For years, you three taught me one thing. I am on my own. My struggles were mine, and my successes were mine. I built this life without a single dollar or a single word of encouragement from anyone in this room. You are not shareholders in this success. You are not entitled to a dividend. You are spectators. The silence was crushing. My mother was pale. Mark stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, and maybe, for the first time, a flicker of understanding. My father just looked defeated. So, my answer to your proposal is no, I said, my voice firm but not hateful. I will not be paying your debt. I will not be saving your house. The consequences of your decisions are your own, just as mine have always been mine. My mother finally found her voice. How can you be so cruel? She whispered, tears in her eyes. We're your family. Cruel? I replied with a sad, humorless smile. I'm not being cruel. I'm being consistent. I'm giving you the exact same level of support and you always gave me. You're finally getting from me what you've always given. Nothing. I stood up. I think it's time for you to leave. They left without another word. Watching them go, I didn't feel a rush of victory. I felt a quiet, profound sense of release. The ghost of their disapproval had finally faded. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply held up a mirror. In the end, it was never about the money. It was about validation. For years, I craved theirs, thinking I needed it to feel whole. But standing there that day, I realized the only validation that ever mattered was my own. My success wasn't built to spite them. It was built for me. The fact that they couldn't share in it wasn't my revenge. It was just the natural consequence of the seeds they'd sown. They taught me to be self-reliant, and I just learned the lesson too well. My life is 100% better now, not because of the money, but because of the peace that comes from letting go. I found my own tribe, a family forged in loyalty and respect, not just blood. They didn't believe in me until it was too late for them anyway. For me, their disbelief came right on time. It was the push I needed to find my own way. What would you have done in my shoes? Was my response justified, or was it too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about standing your ground and finding your own worth, make sure to subscribe for more.